biblical reading this morning. I imagine many of you are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who sort of wrote the defining work on death and dying many, many years ago, actually. This is not that book. It is a subsequent book called Death, the Final Stage of Growth. It was written 35 years ago, but it is still pertinent today. Regardless of your perspective, it's not really the dying that's so hard. Dying takes no skill and no understanding. It can be done by anyone. What is hard is living until you die. Whether your death is imminent or a long way off. Whether it's you who are dying or one you love. You cannot learn to accept death when you avoid it and deny it. You must face death squarely if you are to deal with it constructively. Whether it's you who are dying or one you love, it will be difficult. The end of a life is not something any of us can easily accept, but the fact does not go away if you ignore it. And the real challenge is to fully live the time you have. Learning to reinvest yourself in living when you have lost someone you love is very difficult. But only through doing so can you give some meaning to that person's death.
One question. You got
Exodus, Deuteronomy, they're kind of close. No, you're good.
I thought maybe I had a different reading here. Okay, the reading is actually from Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 10. Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, the headland of Passad, which faces Jericho, and Yahweh showed him all the land, as far as Gilead and Dan, and in Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh. All the lands of Judah as far as the western sea, and the Nebo, and the stretch of land, the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, and as far as Zor. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "This is the land I swore to Sarah and Abraham, to Rebekah and Isaac, to Leah, Rachel, and Jacob, that I would give their descendants. I have let you feast your eyes upon it, but you will not cross over." So there in the land of Moab, Moses, the servant of God, died, as Yahweh decreed, and he was buried in the valley opposite Beth Peor in the land of Moab. But to this day, no one knows the exact burial place. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyesight was strong and he was quite vigorous. For 30 days, the Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab until they completed the period of grief and mourning. Now Joshua ben Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. And the Israelites gave him their obedience, carrying out the order God had given to Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face. So ends the reading.
Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, help us as we are in the midst of death and grief to talk about learning and growing in life, to live each moment, to be present, to be grateful, to learn healing, that we might inch toward wholeness. And may the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, be filled with your comfort and your grace and your insight. Amen. Sometimes I wish I had your really deep voice, Jen. Moses. Moses' death was just about the perfect death, right? He made it to 120 years old. He still had his eyesight. He was still healthy. In fact, what they say, he was strong and quite vigorous. He never went through that dying phase, painful phase. God just took him up to the top of the mountain and said, "Here, look, this is all the land you've been striving for, wanting to bring your family and your tribe to. It's beautiful, isn't it? Time for you to go." And he just kind of falls asleep, you know? It's just done. Moses is just done. Still seems a little unfair to me that Moses didn't actually get to go into the land. Legend has it was because he didn't exactly obey God when it came to getting water out of the rock, but that's a whole other story. Nevertheless, he was loved, he was revered. There's never been another prophet like him in all of Judaism, and the people, according to their tradition, spent 30 days grieving and mourning before they passed on the reins to Joshua. 30 days. You know, there have been studies done where they've asked people, well, how long do you think grief should last? Do you want to take a guess at how long, on average, the normal population thinks grief should last?
3 days.
Okay, 3 days. Anybody else want to hazard a guess?
Forever.
That's not what they said, but it could take forever. The standard answer is anywhere between 2 days and 2 weeks. And in reality, we haven't even started to grieve at 2 weeks. In fact, some people say a minimum of 2 years. And a therapist I worked with said a year for every 5 years that you've been with someone. But everybody's different. You're done when you're done if you're done. The important piece is to continue to grow and to continue to the process of healing. And sometimes you get to a place where you think you've got it all figured out, and then something will happen in your life and it'll all come up again, and you begin the process again. But it's important that we engage the process, because we can't live a meaningful, purposeful life if we can't allow ourselves to grieve. So, just to flesh some of this out just a little bit, we're obviously talking about grieving death today, but what else do we grieve? What other losses do we grieve? A physical loss, as our health, the job loss, friendships, divorce.
Dreams or ideas.
Say that again.
Dreams or ideas. Goals.
Dreams or ideas. Sometimes expectations. You can be an empty nester. Sometimes any of those major transitions, whether you leave a community, get a new house, you're leaving, high school to go to college, or college to go into the real world, they can all be not only, some of them are exciting transitions, but there's a level of grief to all of them. So what does it feel like? What does grief feel like? Emotionally, physically, what does it feel like? Heavy. Empty. What else? What do you fear? Sad. Painful.
Abandoned.
Abandoned. Lost. Anybody get angry? Anger? Fear? Did you have another one, Diane, or you're just agreeing?
I agree with anger.
Okay. How about exhausted? Emotionally, physically shot. You feel sort of like the world should just stop. How can anybody go on when clearly the world should just stop for a while we all get our bearings and cry and grieve and try and work through this. Anything else come to mind? Probably missed a few in there.
Self-esteem.
A loss of self-esteem. Okay. Who am I? A lot of questions. Fear. What comes next? Relief, perhaps.
Regret if you went back.
Regret if there was something unfinished. Yeah, there's a whole gambit of emotions that could happen in the midst of all of that. So, how or why is grief part of our spiritual journey? You have to learn to move forward, but why is that part of our spiritual journey? Otherwise, you die physically, emotionally, intellectually. Jerry?
We have to find some source of renewal.
We have to find a source of renewal. Okay? And hopefully our spiritual self is part of that, or our source, the divine, our creator, God, essence, however you want to understand that, is part of that, that force that renews us, brings us life. Sometimes when religion is done well, it helps us spiritually in the rituals that it provides, in lighting a candle, in a funeral or a memorial service, in the 30 days that the Jews take still to say this is a time of grieving. Jewish folks also sit Shiva, where they sit, it's like a week-long wake, where people just continue to come and you're allowed to talk about this, encouraged to talk about the person and to share and to cry and to laugh and everything that comes with that. So there are some rituals that help us spiritually as well. I also believe that the spiritual journey is simply about healing, not simply, but also about healing and moving toward wholeness. And unless we move through that grieving process to healing, we can't make it to a place, or even closer to a place of wholeness. I think our culture tends to be really good at intellectualizing death. We can't avoid grieving. None of us can avoid loss in our lives ever. It's just a matter of how we handle it and how we process it. One of the things Kubler-Ross said in her book is that avoiding grief is not a choice. She said the real choice is whether you'd like to experience it hard and fast or hard and slow. That's really our only choice. It's all hard. And we all do it a little bit differently. But again, our culture is very good at intellectualizing and sort of stuffing the rest of it. Oh, we should be done in 2 days to 2 weeks, and then we just move on. You get 3 days off of work. Oh, you should be fine. You should be able to function again. And I think it somewhat has to do with the fact that we don't know what to do with people who are over-emotional about grief. We don't know what to do when people cry. It's seen as weakness, it's seen as instability by others, and so we ourselves learn to stuff it and get by on that wonderful phrase, I'm fine, right? Because we don't think anybody really wants to know how we are. We see the widow or the widower who's still openly emotional a month or a year or so after that person's passed away, and we don't know what to do with that. And so I'm fine. But if we intellectualize death, if it just lives on the surface of I know he's dead and I'm going on with life and I'm stuffing everything else, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're not allowing ourselves to grow. We're not allowing ourselves to heal or anybody else to heal. There's a story she told about a woman named Carol. And Carol was vibrant and vivacious and energetic and she's a professional woman. She and her husband had 3 kids. Life was good. And then one day when her husband Russ was 43 years old, he swiftly and unexpectedly died in her arms. And to deal with the grief, she medicated herself. And she had a caregiving professional say to her, "Oh, we don't cry about these things, do we?" And so between those two things, she managed to sort of live in denial. She and her 3 kids stuffed the grief, were quote-unquote brave and strong and went on. It was about 18 months later that she started to have psychosomatic illnesses, and she lost many pounds, and she was angry, and she was upset, and she didn't know what to do, and so she called Kubler-Ross, her folks, and they went to her house, and they got to her house, and here the woman is dressed in blue. She's newly decorated her house in blue. She has a blue new car in the driveway. You want to guess what the husband's favorite color was? Blue. His clothes were still in the closet, 18 months later. His shaving stuff is still in the sink. His smoking apparatus is still next to his easy chair. There is a picture of him in every room in the house. The room was essentially turned into a sacred shrine for dad and husband. And they said to her, "So when are you going to let Russ die?" "I don't want him to die." "But he's dead." "Well, I know he's dead, but I don't want him to die." Intellectually, she knew he was gone. But emotionally, she couldn't let him go. And so, over these 18 months, she'd gone through 3 counselors. She'd lost her job. She'd lost weight. She was obviously unhealthy. But she'd never had anybody who tried to very gently and carefully lead her through the grieving process. Or perhaps that's why she had 3 counselors. She fired them all. She didn't want them to lead her through the grieving process. It's dangerous and unhealthy not to address and process our grief. And we all have, and all those emotions that we threw out just a minute ago, they tangle up inside of us. And they will sit there and eat away at us if we don't find a way to get them out. And people need a way to express their emotions, whether it's through talking or crying or writing poetry or doing different rituals, whatever it is, it needs to be expressed. And we need to be able to encourage people to let those feelings out, to talk about the person, to remember the person, to share stories about the person. Instead of just now they're, we don't see them anymore, so they're gone, and we don't talk about them ever. And again, this is one of the hard pieces in our society. I know many folks who over the years who have said to me, I don't know what to say when you walk through the visitation line at the wake or the service or whatever. Don't like doing it, don't want to go, have to make something up, but it's really uncomfortable. And can't wait until that part's over. Phew, got that over with. Now we just won't talk about that person because we don't want to upset anybody anymore. We want them to be okay. We don't want them to be upset. And we think that talking about the dead person is going to make them upset. But what if that's part of the healing process? What if that's exactly what needs to happen in order for us to move on? Think of a funeral as a surgery, okay? What if, when somebody has surgery, a couple weeks later, a couple months later, maybe if it was a really bad surgery, you're asking them how they're doing, aren't you? How's your neck? How's your arm? How's your knee? How you doing with that? You feeling better? You getting stronger? You getting around? Is there anything you need? Right? For some reason, that's easy. But a funeral is kind of the same way. It's the first step in the healing process. In the same way, a surgery is the first step in a healing process. And we all need to help those folks who are going through the rest of that process, especially in the first year with the first birthdays and the first anniversaries and the first holidays, all of those first times going grocery shopping, going to church, all of those first times without people are so, so hard. But we help the healing process if we engage it, and we help others engage it instead of ignoring it. You know, I know funerals and memorial services are intended to help facilitate part of the grieving process, to honor and remember and talk about the person and cry and all those things. But even those ceremonies have almost become, the word is on the tip of my tongue, sterile is the word I'm looking for. It's almost a hands-off. Somebody dies, we hand over the body, and the next thing you know, you're getting a little tub bag with their ashes in it. Well, what happened in the midst of all? You know, they're gone in an instant, and then they're just gone. We aren't given the opportunity to be with that body, to have a physical presence anymore. And perhaps that's also part of what's needed as part of the grieving, healing process. And she talks about a funeral director who lost his father. His father died while he was there, and the rescue squad or the hearse or whoever came to pick him up, and they were going to just, take his father away, and he kind of went, no, I want to do it. I'm the son, I should do this. And so it helped that he knew how to do this. So he lifted up the body, and he put it on the gurney, and he covered it up, and he took it out to the vehicle. And while he did have a friend do the embalming and taking care of the body, he did all of the details, the death certificates and the obituaries and the church and the pastor and the everything else that so often we hand right over to a funeral home. And he thought to himself, I know I can do this because I'm a funeral director, but I also want to do this because I'm the son. I want that ownership, I want that connection, I want that opportunity, honestly, to grieve, to feel it, to go through it, to do this for my father. And he realized that he wasn't giving other people the opportunity to do that. That all in good faith and good, in an attempt to be a good funeral director, we want to alleviate your pain. Let me take care of that for you. You don't want to have to worry about that. We don't want to upset you anymore. But in that process, he thought, maybe I'm doing them a disservice by not allowing them the physical contact or the ability to do some of those other things themselves. And so he changed the way he started working with people. And shortly thereafter, he had a young couple whose 2-year-old son drowned in a neighborhood pond. The couple were 19 and 22 years old. And when they finally met with him, they were numb. They were in denial. They couldn't think, weren't functioning. And he spent quite a bit of time with them, and when he realized the depth of that denial and that numbness, he said to them, when you bring Butchie's clothes to the funeral home, he said, I want you to let me know at that time whether you want to dress him or not. He said, don't answer now, but I want you to think about whether you want to dress him. Now think about it. You're young. 1 minute he's there, the next minute he's just not there at all. You haven't had any time physically even to say goodbye. So they got to the funeral home, and they had decided they didn't want to dress him. And so they sat on the floor, and he talked them through what it was going to look like and what they'd be doing. And then they spent the next 2 hours talking and crying and swearing and apologizing and questioning and just time spent being with him and starting to let those emotions come out while they dressed him. So that by the time they got to the visitation, they had already sort of been able to expunge some of that, to release some of that, so they were in a place to receive hugs and love and condolences and sympathy. Obviously not the end, but somebody who was cognizant enough and had the ability to help them jumpstart their grief And that was 35 years ago. I still, I'm afraid, have never experienced a funeral director who's offered those options. Maybe some of you have. But I think we still try to make it all very sterile. It takes courage to process grief. It takes courage to ask people to help you to process grief. It takes courage to maybe reach out and find somebody that you can sit and talk to. It takes courage to allow ourselves to hurt and to cry and to scream and to swear and to whatever we need to do to start to move through it. It takes courage to live again. To work through it and to live. To find meaning in life again and purpose in life again, so that we honor their memory and so that we live until we die and we live fully. And so I encourage all of us to have that courage to engage every piece of life, not just the good parts, but the bad, difficult, hurtful, painful, angry parts, that we can help them to heal and move toward wholeness. So that when we get to the end of our own lives, whether it's 2 days from now, or 20 years from now, or 40 years from now, we won't say that we didn't live because we'd been numb. That we didn't live because we lost somebody else. That we didn't live because we got stuck. That there are regrets for things we didn't do or didn't say. Have the courage to live fully, to live today with whatever comes with that.